The MVP discussion is a three-man race.
And a legit three-man race.
A legit three-man race. I got a couple, 1A, B, C. I like your list, Nick. With that being said, I can see the argument. Russ should be saying that about Paul George, and I'd listen to anyone that wants to say it about Paul George because he's having an extraordinary season. Giannis is still my front runner. I would still put him at the top. But what Paul George has been able to do with this Thunder team, the numbers he's putting up, and doing it on both ends. I mean, to me, he's the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, leading the league in steals, second in points per game.
Does that get him more votes for the MVP being defensive MVP?
I think that may factor in for some voters when it comes to James Harden, because to me, Giannis is another player who's excellent.
He'll be first team all defensive team.
So where do you start to separate? It's such small margins that you're separating things. Do you look at record? Do you look at how much of a factor they are on their team's success? Because really, if you're looking at these three guys and you're piecing it together, Milwaukee has been absolutely rolling over teams. So what credit does Giannis get for having the best record in the NBA? But then, Paul George and the Thunder to be third in a very tough Western Conference. So all of that factors in. To me, one of the most impressive stats for Paul George, because he talked about this coming into the season. I just think it speaks to the improvements that he make, to the way in which he's put so much emphasis into improving. The 8 rebounds per game. Last year, he averaged 5.5 rebounds per game, and he came into this season, he said in the preseason, he said, the one area I want to improve at is on the glass. I want to rebound more. I want to make that be a focus for me this year. So a lot of eye-popping numbers that we look at and that we're impressed by. But to me, that's understanding, doing some of the little things for his team, getting him to that point. But I'm just so impressed with what he's been able to do this season.
I feel the narrative shifting away from James Harden, because the two guys he's competing with have things in common that people right now, either fairly or unfairly, are not going to assign to James Harden. Fairly is the just raw number of wins. The Bucks got 43. They have the best record in the NBA. The Thunder have 37, and the Rockets are at 33. So there's the wins, which has always been part of the MVP discussion. The other is, Giannis and Paul George are the two best wing defenders in basketball right now. They're having Kawhi is right there as well, to be fair. But Giannis and Paul George, the impact on their team defense has been extraordinary. Now Harden, he's surprising people. He's top 3 in deflections. He's top 3 in steals. He's I think second amongst guards and blocks, but he is not having. So he's no longer a bad defender, but he is not having the night-to-night defensive impact either Paul George or Giannis is having. And so it looked like Harden was going to run away from the field in this. But see, before the year, I said it might not matter what Harden does. I can't see the voters giving him a second straight MVP just because he hasn't had the playoff success. And I think the voters remember giving Steve Nash a second straight MVP. And kind of we look back on that and say, who should one of those MVPs have gone to? Was one of them should have been LeBron? Should Kobe have gotten one of them? Shaq had an argument for one of those years. So Harden, he's averaging 37 points a night. He has scored 30 in 31 consecutive games when only 14 guys in the league have scored 10 in 30 consecutive games. And yet, right now, I think you will have as many people that have Harden third on their ballot as first on their ballot, fair or otherwise. I don't think many people are going to have Paul George 1, though. I think it's Giannis is going to be 1. For most people that don't have Harden 1, they're going to have Giannis 1, and Paul George is 2 or 3.
And the one thing, too, that you don't hear with Harden is, compared to every other narrative around the league, who's been healthy. Like, he's had to score and play this way out of necessity. Yeah. And I don't see people making that the case for him. I think that people will get a sense of fatigue because we start talking about it for a long, long time. And I just think that ultimately, when you're trying to separate pluses and minuses, you have to look on the defensive side. You talked about KD a couple years ago when he decides to leave OKC and goes to Golden State. You said he forfeited the chance to be MVP, but he played so well in that first year defensively that we said, man,
maybe he could be.
Maybe he could be. So we can't now stop doing that. When you're trying to separate these players, you have to look, especially when you have two of the elite defenders in the MVP conversation, and Giannis and Paul George, you have to include that in the evaluation.
Do you think the narrative around Paul George changes depending on where OKC finishes in the standings? Say they come in first higher than Golden State? Do you think that you take a more serious look at him?
If they came in first, yeah.
Yes.
I think that would absolutely factor in. And I think it's the same thing. One of the first things I said about Giannis, the fact that Milwaukee has the best record in the NBA.
Sure.
So I do think where they finish factors in. I think, you also look at Paul George, and he, by a long shot, leads the league in net rating. So how the team performs when he's on the floor versus off the floor is significant. So the impact that he makes. And to me, I also think the narrative that we talk so much when it comes to James Harden is he aesthetically pleasing to watch? Do we like? I feel like so much of what we talk about, and whether you like it or not, the numbers show. You said it, CC.
Right.
It's not a necessity that he's doing that. To me, it's extraordinary to watch the way in which he creates separation and how he is just an absolutely unstoppable force on offense. But so much of the dialogue is, oh, do you enjoy it? Do you like it? Do you like how this is played? So I think that in many ways impacts
Let's say, for instance, KD leaves Golden State. Steph only has him and Clay next year. Steph decides to play the same way Harden is playing. Same numbers, exactly the same number. What would we be saying about Steph Curry?
Oh, that he's back to being the best player in the world. Right. Like which is why I've been defending Harden throughout. He's done it out of necessity. His true shooting percentage, people were like, Jackson, we need threes. His true shooting percentage is identical to Giannis's true shooting percentage. That's because he gets the free throw line and he shoots 38% from three on 13 a game. Like, that's going to jack up your true shooting percentage. So I think Harden's been absolutely fantastic. Where the MVP conversation is tough for Rockets fans is the MVP that they most think Harden deserved is not Steph's first or Steph's second. It is the MVP that Russell won. The MVP that Russell won because Rockets fans were sitting there saying their team didn't win enough. Yep. He was chasing stats. And right now the knock on Harden is, well, the team's not winning enough. And this streak, like the reason this streak didn't end at 29 was because up 15 with 2 minutes left a few nights ago, he's in there jacking threes. And he scored 8 points in the final 2 minutes, kept the streak going. To do any type of amazing thing statistically, you're going to have to chase stats to a degree. But a lot of the arguments Houstonians used against Russ, they would then have to use for Harden this year.
And, Sarah, in that year, you have to remember, what did they hold against Harden? His defense. Now, he's a better defensive player then, but, man, I had never heard that in the MVP conversation as much as he doesn't play on the defensive end. And we had clips after clips where he was just olaying, just letting people past him. So it's amazing how much that has changed, but I believe that narrative did cost him that MVP.
It factors into Nick's point when you're talking about it against two of the best defenders in the league and two of the best wing defenders in the league. Then it emboldens their case for why they should be
Harden if it was a Harden versus LeBron discussion, Harden this year has been a better defender than LeBron. Yeah. The guys he's up against, though, have been the two best wing defenders in basketball.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.